Android 1.0. This was the very beginning. Released in 2008 alongside the HTC Dream, it was the first publicly available version of Android. It could browse the web, send emails, and run basic apps, but compared to what came later, it was extremely limited. There was no on-screen keyboard, no video recording, and the App Store had only a few dozen options. Still, it proved that an open-source mobile operating system could actually work on a real device. Android 1.5 Cupcake. This was the update that introduced the on-screen keyboard, making physical keyboards on phones less necessary. It also added the ability to record and upload videos, along with widgets on the home screen. Small changes by today's standards, but at the time they made the phone feel significantly more usable for everyday people. Android 1.6 Donut. Donut expanded Android's reach by adding support for different screen sizes and resolutions. Before this, Android was built around one specific phone layout. It also improved the camera app and added a universal search bar that could look through apps, contacts, and the web all at once. This version quietly laid the groundwork for Android to run on many different devices from many different manufacturers. Android 2.0 Eclair. Eclair is remembered mostly because it launched on the original Motorola Droid, which was a major commercial hit. It brought a redesigned interface, a much better camera with flash support, and turn-by-turn Google Maps navigation, which was a genuinely big deal at the time. Having free built-in navigation changed how people thought about smartphones as everyday tools. Android 2.2 Froyo. Froyo introduced something that made Android noticeably faster, a feature called JIT compilation that improved how the phone processed app code. It also added the ability to install apps directly onto a memory card, which helped budget devices with limited internal storage. Wi-Fi hotspot functionality came with this version too, letting phones share their mobile internet connection with other devices. Android 2.3 Gingerbread. Gingerbread became one of the most widely used Android versions in history, partly because it ran well on affordable hardware. It refined the user interface with a cleaner look, improved the keyboard, and added better support for gaming. For a long time, millions of people in developing countries were still using Gingerbread-based phones years after newer versions had come out, simply because the devices were cheap and accessible. Android 3.0 Honeycomb. Honeycomb was built entirely for tablets and was never intended for phones. It introduced a redesigned interface with a darker theme, a new navigation bar, and a more desktop-like experience. It was not the most polished release Google ever made, and they moved on from it relatively quickly, but it showed that Android was thinking seriously about form factors beyond the standard smartphone. Android 4.0 Ice Cream Sandwich. Ice Cream Sandwich unified the phone and tablet experiences that had split apart with Honeycomb. It brought a much cleaner visual design, introduced Face Unlock for the first time, and gave users the ability to swipe away notifications and recent apps. It felt like the moment Android started looking like a modern operating system rather than something still figuring itself out. Android 4.1 Jelly Bean. Jelly Bean focused almost entirely on making Android feel smooth. Google called the initiative Project Butter, and the goal was to get the interface running at a consistent 60 frames per second. Before this, Android had a reputation for occasional stuttering and lag compared to iOS. Jelly Bean also introduced expandable notifications and Google Now, an early intelligent assistant that could surface information before you even searched for it. Android 4.4 KitKat. KitKat was designed to run well on lower-end hardware, specifically phones with as little as 512 megabytes of RAM. This was a strategic decision to help Android reach more people in markets where cheap smartphones were the norm. It also brought a cleaner, more transparent interface and deeper integration with Google services. The name came from a real partnership with Nestlé, which was the first time Android used a brand name instead of a generic dessert. Android 5.0 Lollipop. Lollipop was one of the biggest visual overhauls Android ever received. It introduced material design, a new design language built around bold colors, layered surfaces, and smooth animations. Everything from the notification shade to the lock screen was rebuilt. It also moved to a new runtime system under the hood that made apps launch faster and use battery more efficiently. Lollipop genuinely made Android look like it belonged in the same conversation as any other premium operating system. Android 6.0 Marshmallow. Marshmallow introduced app permissions in a way that felt more honest. Previously, apps asked for all their permissions at installation, and users had to accept everything or install nothing. Marshmallow changed that, so apps had to ask for specific permissions only when they actually needed them. It also added a battery-saving feature called Doze, which learned when a phone was sitting still and unused and reduced background activity accordingly. Android 7.0 Nougat. Nougat brought native split-screen multitasking, letting two apps run side by side on the same screen. It also improved notifications significantly, allowing users to reply to messages directly from the notification without opening the app. Data saver mode arrived here too, helping people on limited mobile data plans. Control which apps could use background data. On the performance side, Android began moving toward faster app installation through a new compilation approach, Android 8.0 Oreo. Oreo pushed strongly toward better battery life and background app management. Apps running in the background were limited more strictly, which helped devices last longer between charges. Picture-in-picture mode appeared here, letting video continue playing in a small window while the user navigated elsewhere. Notification channels also arrived, giving users much finer control over exactly what kinds of alerts each app was allowed to send. Android 9.0 Pie. Pie introduced gesture-based navigation, beginning the shift away from the traditional three-button navigation bar. It also brought adaptive battery features that used machine learning to predict which apps a person actually used and deprioritize the ones they did not. The brightness setting became adaptive too, adjusting based on both lighting conditions and the user's own manual adjustments over time. Pie started to make Android feel like a system that was learning from the person using it. Android 10. This was the version where Google stopped using dessert names for public branding, though the internal code name was still Queen Cake. Android 10 made system-wide dark mode official, gave users stronger location privacy controls, and introduced support for foldable phones. It also made gesture navigation the default, pushing the three-button layout to a secondary option. This version marked a clear turning point toward privacy as a visible priority rather than a background feature. Android 11. Android 11 was built with communication and privacy as its two central themes. A dedicated conversation section in notifications kept messages from apps like WhatsApp and Telegram organized separately from other alerts. One-time permissions arrived, allowing users to grant access to the camera or microphone for a single session only. Screen recording was added as a built-in feature, removing the need for third-party apps to do something many users already wanted. Android 12. Android 12 was the most dramatic visual redesign since Lollipop. Google introduced Material U, a design system where the interface automatically pulled colors from the user's wallpaper and applied them across the system and supported apps. Privacy indicators appeared on screen whenever an app was accessing the camera or microphone. The animations became more physical and expressive, reacting to touch in ways that felt connected to the content on screen. It was Android making a clear statement about personal expression. Android 13. Android 13 continued refining what Android 12 had started. It gave users the ability to grant apps access to only specific photos or videos rather than an entire media library. Per-app language settings arrived, so a user could run one app in French and another in English on the same device. Themed icons expanded to more apps, and Bluetooth permissions became more granular. It was a quieter release compared to 12, focused more on finishing what had been started than introducing something entirely new. Android 14. Android 14 put a strong emphasis on accessibility and customization. Font sizes could now scale larger than before without breaking app layouts. Predictive back gestures were introduced, showing users a preview of where the back action would take them before they fully committed. Health and fitness data got a unified privacy framework, and satellite connectivity support was added at the operating system level for future hardware. It continued the pattern of making Android more adaptable to the specific needs of each individual user. Android 15. This version arrived with a focus on security and smoother multitasking. It introduced private space, a separate locked area within the phone where users could install apps and store data completely hidden from the main profile. This was useful for people who wanted to keep certain apps, accounts, or files away from casual view without needing a second device. Health Connect received deeper integration, and edge-to-edge display support became a stronger requirement for apps, pushing developers to build interfaces that use the full screen properly. Satellite messaging support was also expanded beyond emergency use, pointing toward a future where connectivity would not depend entirely on cell towers. Android 16. This is the most recent major version, and Google made a notable structural change with its release by shifting to a faster update cycle. Rather than one large annual release, Android 16 was part of a move toward more frequent updates throughout the year. On the user side, it brought further refinements to adaptive refresh rate behavior, improved large screen and tablet optimizations, and stronger predictive back gesture support across more parts of the system. Security updates became more modular, meaning critical patches could reach devices faster without waiting for a full system update. Android 16 also continued building on the Material You design language with more consistent theming across Google and third-party apps, making the overall experience feel more visually unified than any previous version. Every version of Android tells the same story in a different way, a system that started with almost nothing, slowly growing into something that runs on billions of devices across the world. From a basic 2008 release that could barely handle a touchscreen keyboard, to an operating system that adapts its colors to your wallpaper, protects your data by default, and works across phones, tablets, and foldables, each version fixed something the last one got wrong and added something the next one would build on. That is how Android became what it is today, not in one big jump, but one update at a time.